Hello everyone, it is Saturday the 8th of January, which means Happy New Year to everybody. This is the first podcast I've been on in around a year. Things have been happening without me this year. Shout outs to SSB, who's been in the podcast channel for 5 days, was not able to wait, and also I stopped him from leaving. That might also have played into it. Welcome back, Zack. Pleasure to have you again.
Hey, thanks. It's great to be here. Luckily, nothing has happened in the world or in my personal life in the last 3 years, so we can pick right up where we left off.
Been quite a big change in your life. You've stepped into parenthood. How's that been?
My daughter just turned 2. This was the first time I think I got to actually have the parent experience of having a Christmas where she understood what was going on. Also, Christmas is her birthday, so it's going to get a little confusing as she tries to extricate those two things in the future. But as it is now, she doesn't really know any different. So,
does she have a KOL username yet?
She does not. Her experience of video games is relatively limited. She has a game on the iPad where you drag blocks around and drop them into holes, and she frequently demands to watch me play the video game with the jumping guys, which is whatever Mario game I decide to play.
You should start her account now, because if she wants to be competitive in a couple of years' time, she'll want the oldest item.
She might know a guy that can hook her up.
We're joined by Gausie, Sam, a player dev. We're also joined by the Flying Dutchman himself, the Dictator, and the Flying Californian Cannon.
Zack, is there any news that you can share on the Asymmetric game for the Playdate hardware? I remember seeing the Playdate a couple years ago at PAX.
No, I don't know where that got to. All of my work on it was done a couple years ago, and I think that everything has slowed down on that because of manufacturing and supply chain stuff, and I really don't know where that's at. I haven't really spoken to anybody about it in a couple of years.
Makes sense. Well, how about the Next of Loathing? How's that development going?
That is going great. That's where the majority of my focus is. I mean, really for the last couple of years. It's getting there. There's like a number of factors that are making it take a long time, and it's like a small number of large factors. I don't know to what extent COVID has interfered with it. I mean, the narrative everywhere is COVID is making games get delayed, but it didn't really affect, we've been a remote company for almost 20 years, so it didn't really change much. I'm sure it has had hidden effects on morale and productivity, but the fact that it happened around the same time that I had a kid makes it very hard for me to extricate, what is it that is making this take a long time? The good news is that definitely one of the things that's making it take forever is that it is probably 2.5 times the size of West of Loathing content-wise at this point. All right, I'm going to do a playthrough where I'm this class. This time I'm fighting, and I'm gonna do the necromancer, or I'm gonna non-combat doing El Vibrato stuff, whatever. I would just sort of pick a focus to play through the game, and it took about an hour to an hour and 15 minutes for me to do a playthrough of West of Loathing. The last time I did a playthrough of the new game at 2 hours and 45 minutes, I was maybe 2/3 of the way through it. So it's not just long either. It's just there's a lot more, and I don't know why we always have this kind of maximalist sensibility where it's this game is the content and the jokes, so the more of them there are, the better the game is going to be. And we have a little bit of a good problem where we didn't expect the way that we imagined that things would go is that we would launch West of Loathing and it would sell well for a little while, which would make us cash positive so that we could build up reserves. And then after a few months of that, we would get back to where we were before, which was just burning through money, so that we would then know exactly how much runway we had to make a game. But West of Loathing has continued to sell so well, and KOL has been eerily persistent in its ability to make money, that we have been in the black the entire time. And so we sort of have this problem that I suspect is why Valve takes forever to make a game, or Bethesda takes forever to make a game, which is that we don't have a financial need to release anything new, so we just start trying to make the thing that we want to make, as opposed to being bound by all the constraints of a product.
And if you're going to have a problem, that's a good one to have.
But it also there is definitely something to be said for crap, we have 4 months before we run out of money, for actually getting a game made and out the door. That was a very stressful period of West of Loathing's development, but it was also one where we just got a lot of stuff done, and at the end of it there was a video game. Whereas I don't want this to turn into a Tobias and the Magic Scepter situation where comes out in 2045, but it won't. I would say that the game is roughly divided into 7 sections, and I am currently in the process of finishing up the 6th one. So it's like the light at the end of the tunnel is visible.
It has to be exciting.
It is. It's cool. Like getting it to the point where I could actually do playthroughs. Finally, it's like, oh, okay, good. This is fun. And so that's been reassuring.
Do you think we'll get any little drops of hints and stuff about what we can expect of that, as, at least from the KOL community perspective?
I don't know. I honestly, we have spent like 0 time talking about launch strategy. That's not entirely true, but because we are coming on the heels of this is a sequel to a game that was already successful, we have a lot of sort of algorithmic advantage, and we don't have to worry about marketing and launch strategy as much. We talked about West of Loathing a lot before it came out, and I think we're probably not going to do as much of that, but I don't know that the amount of it that we're going to do is 0. We'll figure it out.
All right, Ain, I think you were going to take us over into some of the changes we've recently seen in Kingdom of Loathing.
We made quite a change to Olfaction, which has been in the motions for, I think Cannon said at least since his being a dev. Is that right, Cannon?
I remember us talking about Olfaction since like 2018, 2019. I'm not sure about earlier than that.
What was the intention of the change? Why did you want the change to happen? How do you feel about the change and the reception to the change?
There's going to be kind of a theme here. It's Olfaction is definitely like we're gonna. This is the thing we're gonna have to wash down with the rest of the sugar, because the Olfaction thing is definitely the most like nerf thing that we did on Nerf Day. Everything else I think was pretty. We'll get there, but Olfaction. The issue that I had with Olfaction, and this is going to be a theme, is that because of the way that it worked before, like because it was driven by you having this effect and it lasted a certain amount of time, and if you got rid of the effect, you were no longer olfacting the thing. It created a bunch of like fiddly nonsense that people had to do that suddenly made like the soft green echo eye drop antidote items important in a run, and that was like interesting. But then it started to be like, was it the that dungeon correspondence thing where you'd get an antidote from it? That dropped out of standard, so standard could really use another source of these eye drops so that you can get rid of the olfaction effect, so that you can olfact things closer together. And it got to the point where it's like, well, we would never have designed a system like this, and like maybe it's fine and maybe it's fun and certainly it's powerful, but it seemed goofy to me that this thing that was just meant to be, the purpose of that effect was only to have a place where we could tell the player what monster they were olfacting. The effect was not supposed to be the thing that actually did the olfacting. And then it suddenly got to be that was the most important element of it. I know that this is one of those things where it's like, well, but people were having fun juggling this and doing all of this stuff. And it just had been kind of rubbing me the wrong way for a long time. And I wanted to just make it work in a more straightforward way. Also, like, I feel like for a lot, if not most people, being able to just fire it at 0 mana and have it last forever is not that much worse than what they were using it for. I understand that in run, it's gonna slow you down and make it less useful, but like that's just the tension that always exists, which is that you want the game to keep changing so that you can figure out new ways to go faster. But if it only ever changes to go faster, it eventually becomes degenerately fast, and we can't do anything else, and so we occasionally have to pull those levers the other direction.
Related in a weird way is that if you remember in production with the magnifying glass, we kind of talked about to you how people who were looking to optimize their use of the magnifying glass in run would keep track of their 13 turns and then drop that monster in a location that we're gonna call delay, just for the purposes of
also we weren't really going to fundamentally change that, and it wasn't that like, no, I don't want to put an explicit counter on here. It was more that like, oh man, we've made all of these changes to try to make things less fiddly, and then I've just done something that I didn't realize was going to be fiddly. But I think different players are going to have there's going to be a spectrum of whether things are like fun in a way that makes you feel like you're exercising mastery over the systems versus like homework that you just have to keep track of in order to derive some advantage that you would otherwise miss. There's obviously some level of it that is acceptable and fun enough to ship. I appreciate having you guys in dev to just tell us what the overall sentiment about that stuff is. And dev has a long history of like just figuring out how to trick me into believing that things were my idea, or like get me to do the right thing for reasons that are important to me rather than the real reasons. And it's like I'm like okay. Like once I was there, and it's like now I get to write some little joke line about each number. I was like, yeah, okay, this is fine. This counter's fine. We had initially pitched that as was like, would this be broken if it was just a free fight every 13 turns? When I asked that, I wasn't thinking like, does this shave a bunch of turns off of runs? I was just thinking like, is that too many free fights because you get some stats and some items from them, right? And that is, I think, the biggest disconnect that I come into things with is that I don't really understand the implications of a lot of the stuff that we end up doing. And so that's why having people who actually play the game at a high level available to explain those things to me is really valuable.
The other new change was the lucky and semi-rare merge.
We didn't really have anything on deck to change in January, and we always ended up bound up in these conversations when I would say, all right, I think everybody is agreed that this is like, it's fine to get rid of the semi-rare counter. That was what, like, the semi-rare counter is like one of those classic things where I was like, I think from a like pacing of you occasionally getting a fun thing standpoint, it would be cool to have this mechanic where there was something that happened much less commonly than ordinary rewards that you got from adventuring in zones, but much more common than an ultra rare, which is why it was sort of like got positioned as a semi-rare. But then because that was a number, it became a number that could be known. And so then we started adding content that interacted with it as a number that could be known. And it slowly just got to the point where it's like, man, again, I wouldn't have done it this way on purpose if I had known how it was going to turn out, because it feels to me like waiting out a semi-rare counter and then like missing it because you accidentally forgot and tried to get the same one twice in a row, or spent the wrong turn in the wrong zone, or you lost track of like which fight you ran away from and it didn't count as a turn and which one you did or whatever. That just seemed like a level of tedium that I wanted to get rid of. And also the fact that like most of the Clover adventures in zones were more or less useless to players in a modern context, because it was a thing that a lot of the more recently created zones just don't even have Clover adventures in them, because we just didn't. It got to be a weird vector for putting stuff in, because it's like, well, it's not really, I can't put anything too good in as a Clover adventure because there are tens of millions of Clovers lurking out in the world, and you could just get one every turn if you wanted to. And so, but then it's like, well, if it's something that's so lame that you're like mad that you forgot you had a Clover on when you adventured there, that also sucks. And so I just sort of didn't mess with them. And the semi-rare mechanic was better for that. Like at least it did somewhat limit the supply of those things that came in. But yeah, it just did seem like it sucked to keep track of. So making it into a thing that you could do on purpose in a much more limited way. I think that the insight of like definitely deciding that it was going to be a new Clover item, so we just didn't have to worry about the supply of it. And Dev was very excited about a lot of different ways of like, well, what if there was a machine here where once a day you could turn 1,000 old Clovers into a new Clover? And I was really resistant to do any of that stuff, at least to start with, because we get so few opportunities to like roll out something with genuine scarcity in it nowadays, and like I think that I still have a sense of how many lucky adventures a person can get in a day if they are optimizing for it. Let's see how hilariously wrong that is. I think you get like 3 Clovers from the Hermit, and I want to say that you can get maybe 6 to 8 additional lucky adventures from consumables if that's what you're doing.
That sounds about right. You've got the Pill Keeper, you've got Lucky Lindy. Like,
It depends on how degenerate you want to be.
If you go full on, I think you can probably get over 20. I did that for, a while back with the Pillkeeper, and then just cleaning his spleen all the time.
But 20 is a very different number than 1,000. And so I like having 20 as the like absolute balls out cap with current content. We talked about this internally. I don't want to add lucky stuff to an item of the month for quite a while. Like if we could avoid it for a year, I think that would feel the best to me, just because I really don't want to, because this isn't how we operate. I don't want to create the sense that we have like taken something away in order to sell it back. If there are additional sources of it, they will either come much later in item of the month stuff, or they'll be, a part of some miscellaneous. Because like I like the fact that we've established precedent for this is how much organ space lucky is worth, and that it's a pretty significant hit. Now we have years for that to get to the point where it's like I become annoyed with myself for letting it get so common.
One of the things I like is that the clovers or the new source of lucky per day is consistent. If you have time on a Friday versus a Saturday, you get the same amount, which I appreciate. And that leads to one of the listener questions we had. There's been a lot of game development over the years to reduce long tails of variance. Some things like pity adventures or more ways to cap item drops. From my perspective as a player, this has made the game a lot more fun at a casual and semi-competitive level. Is there anything you can share about the effect this has had on the creative process?
When I start to see that, like, oh man, like 1 out of every 1,000 people, this is going to take so long that they will not understand what they're supposed to be doing, then that always feels like a thing that I should fix. Sort of modern versus older quest design sensibilities, I think, is pretty. What would you call the like grammatical reverse of a thing being emblematic of something? It is emblematized by just pirates versus Copperhead, right? Which is contentious because a lot of people were like they wanted to keep doing the pirates. I'm a little skeptical of the claim that the reason that people wanted to keep doing the pirates was because it was fun, more fun than Copperhead. It was faster, and so you can Stockholm syndrome yourself into believing.
I hate pirates, but
I actually think I prefer Copperheads, to be clear. I think most of the reason people prefer Pirates wasn't even that it was faster, it was that you didn't have to be level 11 to do it, so you could work on it while you were leveling.
Was it just because it was nice to have something to do with those turns, or was it because being able to do it then resulted in it being faster overall?
I think a lot of it too is the perspective on Pirates versus Copperhead has changed because Bridge used to be much worse because there was no built-in mechanic like the non-combat that appears when you can overkill the smut orcs.
Oh yeah. That was cool. That I remember the day that we put that in and being like, oh man, this is one of those rare cases where we're adding something that like everyone likes. Like I'm happy that we had this idea. It fits thematically with the zone. It like fixes a problem there. We have improved a lot of the things that annoyed people initially about the Copperhead route because like we do want the game to be fun for people, right? Like it's not this antagonistic relationship. It's just we need to be able to add things to it without every number becoming 0.
Yeah, and also that applies to both the Copperhead route back then and also the Clover changes now. It's hard to actually see how people interact with it until you actually force people to interact with it.
A sense that I've always had, and I'm glad that it has turned out to be true. Right? It's just stuff like I think I was very excited when I think it was you, Cannon Fire, who said like, "Oh man, this pull change, which we'll get to and talk about, this has made it so it might change which method is best to get through the protesters at the Zeppelin." And I was like, "Ah, cool! Like, finally, we get to see if that system is broken in some weird way that nobody knew about because it seemed on the surface to be slower." But the point that I was going to make, and I think the thing that is the more illustrative of the difference in my approach for casual people doing quests and optimizers doing quests is the main problem that not the main problem. The thing that I kept trying to figure out how to write quest tracker text for the pirate stuff. And it was so weird and cumbersome to try to articulate and at any given moment, what are you supposed to do next? That to me, it was like, man, the fact that I can't describe this in a way that is comprehensible to a casual person means that the system is, as I suspected, counterintuitive and goofy. And I would rather have something in there that there is at least a sort of naive approach to that will eventually get the job done, which you then can optimize around. Right. And it's like the pirates thing, like, the pirates are fun. There were a lot of zones, there were a lot of stuff happened in there. But like the insult thing was like, hey, what if we made a thing that was like a version of the insult sword fighting from the Secret of Monkey Island? And we tried, and I don't think we did a very good job of evoking that. And then that's what shipped, and that's what stuck around for years. And that's just like a lot of things would happen like that, right? Like we would be working on something. I mean, what, 2007? We added that, say, and it was like, yeah, that turned out to be kind of a miss. But then it just got so ossified as like the way that you did things that it became very difficult to like engage with players' feelings about it because there got to be this weight of tradition that was as loud a voice as, is this fun and is this well designed?
I really do not miss having to collect pirate insults. I did many runs where I had to do that, and it was never fun.
I never think about pirates. Never miss them.
Well, I'm glad to hear that. I agree with you, and they're also right. But I think, like, just for the overall health of the game, it's better if a new person can finish a run and then have a number to try to make smaller.
But do you think that you're more likely to add lucky adventures now to sort of, well, probably not existing zones, but certainly newer zones in the future, now that there's that change that people don't have, the infinite access to them?
Yeah, I hope so. I hope that when we the next time we add content, we remember, oh yeah, these are cooler now, so we can do this. It's certainly, with it being more of a limited resource, it's more interesting to say, like, oh, okay, we can put a semi-rare here that speeds up progress through this zone. I mean, it's a little like, when's the next time we're going to put in a zone that you have to do in an Ascension run? Like, I don't know. If we replace the level 12 quest with something.
Can you take us through some of the changes that went on with the standard and pulls?
I don't know why it took so long. It seems absurd to me that no one ever pitched the specific thing that we did before, I don't know, whatever it was, like December 28th or whatever, when we were chatting in dev. Like, I had always talked about, like, man, I like, it really feels like 20 is too many pulls now. But then it was pointed out that, well, if you limit it to 10 pulls, those 10 pulls will be the same for every person every day because it's just optimized. Like, that sucks. Nobody wants that. Oh, wait a minute, what if we just limited it in this other way? And then suddenly everyone got really excited about the implications of that, and it was like, okay, I can just make this happen. And, like, I don't know. I would like to say that I did it quickly, but I got into that code and it was like, man, the code for pulling items out of Hanks is a mess. It took a little while, and then I think there's still some. I don't know if Chris has fixed the annoying, like, post Ronin.
Oh no, he did.
I think that was fixed. So what still needs to be fixed is the ability to see what stuff you already pulled or something, with the stuff you can pull and use drop down filter or something.
Yeah, that's a good idea. At the very least, like, not putting a pull link on things that you can't pull.
I'm looking at the devlog now, and I think what you said, maybe this is the year of 10 pulls, and everyone got very afraid. And within 11 minutes, you said, what if instead of reducing pulls, we make it so you can't pull multiples? So I think we went from something that made everyone.
I like that everyone refers to me having really strong opinions on softcore. Yeah, I mean, I play almost exclusively softcore in the game. I think that it is a much more interesting space because it gives you so many more decisions to make. And I've been playing softcore competitively for, like, at least 8 years on and off, probably closer to 10. And the big problem with it has always been that at any given time, there is just something that is always the best thing to do. At one point it was blank out, and then it's been other things at other times. It was stench jelly for a while. And you just settle on some degenerate thing that you pull as many of as you possibly can because it is the clear best choice. And I am really amazed that we didn't hit on the idea, as you mentioned, because it seems so obvious in retrospect. But, like, I had held several hour-long, like, not in person, but by voice conversations about how to improve softcore because the meta was kind of degenerate going into the new year, and we didn't hit on it, and I don't know how we didn't. I mean, the change, I'm thrilled with it. I have spent some time planning for the new softcore meta, and I think it's much more interesting. The change you made just basically gets rid of the degeneracy problem. I'm super happy with it. It's awesome.
That's the thing with good ideas, is that they seem obvious in retrospect, but this one really does seem like somebody would have pitched this even, like, in the very beginning. Like, somebody would have thought, like, oh god, what if there becomes something that, like, you can pull and it shaves 9 turns off of your run, and it becomes the right thing to do to pull 20 of them every run. What shouldn't we anticipate that situation and try to limit it somehow? But yeah, no, I'm glad that seems to have been received really well, because, like, it was very exciting when we started talking about it. It was like, oh yeah, man, wow, man, this maybe is a thing that's going to make all of us happy.
I think there might be some sense on your end that there is an aversion to slowdown from the speed community, and maybe that's true to some extent, But I would happily take a little slowdown and a much more interesting space to play in and a much more fun space to play in over, really fast, but I'm pulling 20 Breatheden bills basically any day. It's interesting and I'm very excited about it.
Yeah, I don't really mind the slowdown as long as it, is applied fairly in a way that it, doesn't end up with leaderboards that you're now competing with that you can't because it applied in the middle of a season or something. But that's why we do, these nerfs at New Year's.
I wouldn't even call this a nerf, right? Like, I guess it's a nerf on a strict power level because you're not going as fast, but it's more just changing how softcore works and a better softcore as far as the person who cares a lot about softcore, I'm concerned. I will say we've had this for a week, and in that time, the little planning that I have been able to do has found a bunch of stuff that wasn't optimal before is seriously worth considering because it looks better on paper, and I'm very happy to see things like that.
Zack, there's a lot of creative process that happens now outside of dev as well. Like when you do your meetings and chats with the rest of Asymmetric that we don't really see. We just kind of get like, oh, what do you think of this idea of, what happens if, some spleen thing here or, this does X, like, what do you think about this? Is it broken? And I guess I've got two questions about that is like, how does the process work between the official Asymmetric members in terms of designing new content? And has it gotten harder over time because like the low hanging fruit has gone, or have you just got so many ideas that you could like not possibly ever be exhausted of them?
About 5 years ago, I was very much in a I do not understand how I can keep coming up with an item of the month every month after all of this time and also have the focus to work on a new game. And so the first move was, I was just talking to Kevin about this at dinner last night. The first move was, I said, can I have a month off? Like, can you guys just make an item of the month without my intervention so that I can work on West of Loathing? And they said, sure. And they made the Witchess set, which was something that I never, ever would have done that, right? Like, that's not an idea that I would have had. It's not a thing that I would have decided to, like, I wouldn't have said, oh, I have this idea. Chris, implement this huge mini game and a bunch of puzzles in it, because I just don't want to make people do stuff that I think is really hard, which is probably a tremendous failing in me as a manager. But like, okay, well, that was great. I don't want to just be like, all right, well, this worked out so well, I'm never going to interact with an item of the month ever again. So we just decided to move to a cycle where me and Chris Moyer and Riff and Kevin would take months in turn where we led the item of the month process. We did that for a long time, but I would say about a year and a half ago, it got to the point where people stopped showing up with a fully formed idea for that, and it started becoming just sort of necessarily more collaborative, because it was like, more and more would be like, yeah, I think maybe I only had 3 years worth of totally novel item of the month ideas in me. Can you guys help me with this? And now it's basically, every conversation, we have a conference call every Monday that's usually an hour to an hour and a half long, and they almost always are like, is it too early to start talking about what the next item of the month is? And we almost always do. Within like 20 minutes, we either start with the theme and figure out what it does, or we look at the KOL wiki page for Mr. Store to see what items are in standard and how long has it been since we did a familiar? Is it time to do a familiar? Okay, what are people really like? What has gone out of standard and people are like, oh, it'd be really nice to have a source of booze or whatever. All right, it's a familiar that drops booze. What is it? It's a vampire vintner. Although I think we had that thing entirely implemented before it became a vampire vintner. It was just like a booze familiar that did something. It has gone back to basically being just 100% collaboratively produced items of the month. Often there will be an idea that one of us will be like, I'm going to run with this. We will like make a Google Doc that sort of describes like, this is what, like, these are all of the items and effects and things and new mechanics and whatever is in this. And then that gets handed to Chris. Chris does the majority of the implementation. Riff does the majority of the writing, except in ones, like sometimes I'll get really excited about wanting to do the writing myself. And then I do the art, and then I feel like we've been a little better about getting items in front of dev for testing earlier. and we've been better about getting items launched on time, and it's just because we're starting earlier. We're just sort of better at the nuts and bolts of like doing this job as a job. I don't think we're going to run out of ideas. I don't really think that there's any such thing as running out of ideas. Like that's a thing that people worry about before they've done enough creative work to understand that like ideas are of basically no value, that like only execution results in there being anything in the world, and ideas are essentially free and infinite. And like if you, I don't know, maybe that's just because of the context that we're operating in, and it's just sort of narratively anything can be anything. So it's I never fear like going to the well and there not being anything in there, because like if I can't come up with something on my own, I can just talk to those guys for a few minutes and somebody will make a dumb joke that we will suddenly just be able to run with. And partly that's just having like a really well-oiled team. You'd think, I mean, I look at the item of the month history in the wiki and I think like, God, I remember how when we came up with this, we were like, it was blood from a stone, and we thought we would never, like, God, how are we going to keep coming up with an item every month that does something new? And then realize there have been 150 other items since then. Like, all right, I guess we were fine.
Sorry if this is a little bit disjointed, Zach, but there's a very special message for you if you scroll up in the live podcast channel.
Yeah, I see this was written by programmers because they've started the list at 0. Great. Well, the time twitching tower, I'm assuming it says tower. We need this, Jake. Every time this comes up, I think, oh yeah, I agree. We should do that. The problem is always that I think, well, God, if we're going to bring it back after all this time, we should put some more content on it. And then like, it hasn't always been like the first few times we did that, when it was just like a grueling 8-hour live development stream that resulted in me just melting into a puddle at the end of it. That wasn't sustainable. We've brought it back without adding another floor to it, but that just feels cheap to me, and I would rather have it be cooler.
If you want something low effort, I think you could probably just draw a picture of a train and stick it on top and not have it do anything when you click on it, and people would go nuts.
Why a train?
Why a train indeed? This is going to be difficult to explain. It's okay, so story time. In 2020, Sam and I were playing a game that you've probably played yourself called Unrailed. It was just a dumb little game, and it was quite fun. I've no idea how it kind of got from us playing this game occasionally to Busta Rhymes just starting to having a meltdown and demanding a train item of the month. In fact, was it you, Sam, who said you wanted like a conductor's hat or something?
Yeah, it was me.
And then it just devolved into this absolute lunacy where people were saying that the next item of the month is going to be a content one and it's going to be Train Realm. And then at one point, I think, was it a couple months back, Burning Bee-Man and Toomey, if they worked together to like basically make like a fake item of the month, a bunch of people on board where they pretended that they'd got this, they had like screenshots and everything. One of my favourite things that they had was a monster called the Extra Horny Succubus, which obviously had 3 horns rather than 2. And then they had people thinking that the next, like the item of the month was this Train Realm, and it just erupted. Jake, I know you have no idea what I mean, but we need to make an item of the month and it needs to be Train Realm. And then you're like, what is Train Realm? And no one knows what Train Realm is.
As you were saying this, I'm like, God, I could just put like a little mini Snowpiercer on top of the tower and put a few monsters in it and something to do with whatever that currency is called that I don't remember. This is another thing where I accidentally created such an obnoxious amount of friction for myself. Every time I add a level to the time twitching tower, because of the way the data structure for like a container document works, I have to move every clickable element in the tower down by however much I increase the height of the image by.
Add a basement.
Everything is indexed from the top down instead of the bottom up.
No, it turns out the whole tower was on a train.
Oh yeah, I could put it on the bottom or just turn the tower sideways, and then I wouldn't have to do it. If I was turning it out to the right, it wouldn't happen anymore. What I should do is just make it so I can add a property to a container document that if that property exists, it just adds that to the Y of all of the element things. Now that I think about it.
Turn it sideways and ask Chris Moyer to very nicely add a thing that rotates images by 90 degrees.
No, add it sideways and each floor becomes a carriage in the train that gets added to the left.
I just want to say I did not know any of this history about Train Realm. I just like making stupid jokes about trains.
It's basically like a corned beefadon or a god lobster thing.
Is the best analogy you can come up with, I think.
Every time it's time to do a challenge path, like a fall challenge path, we try to figure out a way to do a Momoka Men. We'll get it one of these days.
The fireworks shop in general was a very Momentum themed item, and I loved it.
The time switching tower would be best accompanied with, this is an idea I had with Aiden the other day, with someone from Asym attempting to do a sort of competitive run in KOL live streamed, but that's probably too much work for anyone to do.
I think it would probably take one of us a month to do an Ascension. Chris Moyer would have a better chance. Like, Chris is the one who was ever an actual speedrunner, but yeah, I don't think anyone would have fun with that.
I think Gausie, you were going to take us into something Mafia related.
So I'm the sort of person in dev who has the highest sort of coefficient of being most active and most contributing to Mafia. And so there's a couple of questions that we saw from the listener questions that I thought I'd pick up. So the first question was from the Erosion Seeker. It was just a question about items of the month that have information that might be useful and not necessarily fun to track, but there's not really a sort of in-game sensible way, maybe to Asym's tastes of surfacing it. And he was asking if there could be more sort of information in some way that perhaps breaks the fun of the game, but you can see. And the examples he gives are Camel's current spit percentage, the crystal ball predictions, that it already has. Oh, and I assume Cold Medicine Subscription is asking for what the sort of most recent 20 fights, that kind of stuff. So those things that attract in flags, but not necessarily available, but not really game ruining to theoretically show to the user. If there could be some sort of way of seeing those.
Yeah, just things that aren't. Does the camel not tell you how much spit it has?
It does, but only at the end of combat.
I think this is more like, being able to tell when you're selecting a familiar, that kind of stuff.
Between fights. Okay. Yeah. That kind of thing. It's like if this is a number that we explicitly are spelling out to people in some places, there's a lot of things where, like, if we want to, like, the description of a banish telling you what monster is banished or whatever, it's just like very slightly a pain to wire that up somewhere. And so we sometimes just don't do it until somebody asks. There are a bunch of things that get exposed in like comments in fight that are specifically for Mafia to be able to track stuff. I guess I'm a little apprehensive about adding a bunch of stuff that makes it so Mafia is required in order to play most effectively.
I don't think this should necessarily be something that is sort of not passable to a human. Like, I know I have seen people talk about, there should be an API for this information. I don't think that's a good idea for the exact reason you said. But this is sort of, maybe shouldn't have gone in the Mafia pile really, because it's more of a question for any player. But
I don't know. I can understand conceptually why it kind of gets lumped in with that. If dev makes a compelling case that some information, it would be convenient for players for information to be exposed somewhere. It's always sort of like catch Chris when he has a minute, and he'll just do it. It's what were the cold medicine cabinet? That one was, I got talked out of this as being just needlessly cruel, but for me it was more about not forcing you to have to optimize it, I guess. And this was like a disconnect. I was definitely wrong about this, but initially I didn't want you to be able to walk away from it. There wasn't a conception of like knowing what they were going to offer you before you went in there, because I didn't want you to know what they were going to offer you before you went in there. To me, it feels like now I don't know. I was definitely just wrong about this. If you could back out and just keep messing with stuff until they offered you the thing that you wanted, you would have to do that. And I didn't want you to have to do that. But then it was pointed out, well, you have to do that anyway.
Yeah.
Like, because if you're gonna get the most out of it, it has to be perfect every time. And what this does is it allows you to fix it if you mess up, whereas otherwise you just can't fix it if you mess up, which is a little bit of a bummer. But
what you can get from it is so good that actually matters as well, which is a nice problem to have.
That was by design. I mean, the one that was meant to be appealing to speed ascenders was the one that was dependent on a routing choice that you made.
And then the other one was the orb, because you can have. I mean, the thing about the orb is I think people didn't realize until a fair bit into it was that you can have a prediction for every location. There's a new flag for every location ID, and that just, I think, given that you can stack up a bunch of them, became very complicated. But that didn't really come up until people spaded that.
Probably we could just add a gaze into the orb link that just shows you all of those. Like, I don't think it's meant to be hidden. Like, it's a thing that you could write down. So why not, right? Like,
well, the thing about it that's confusing is that you can invalidate those predictions in sort of weird ways, which I think is the cause of that.
I think everyone would be very happy with a link that allowed you to ponder the orb and see what's inside of it.
And I certainly don't object to that. The cold medicine cabinet is a little weirder because it's, where would that be, right? Like, you have to click on something to see it. And if you're going to click on something, why not just click on the cabinet? But I guess what it doesn't do is it doesn't tell you how close you are to having the correct configuration, right? Like, it only tells you what the thing is. So
I think the sort of idea of it maybe would be that there'd be something in your quest log that's like, I just saw this many this and this many this, but if you were ever going to reuse that flag, it'd be useful. But that's I don't know.
Yeah, like a thing that gave you a some view on your recent Ascension history, or your logs. The way the data is stored, I don't think that the table where that stuff is tracked, I don't think is like super optimized for moment to moment querying. It probably could be.
The second question was from Irat, and it was just a question around, how do you feel about Mafia? In a broad sense, how do you guys feel about Mafia? Is it another layer to the game? Is it an improvement? Like, do you think that KOL can exist properly without it? I'm pre-seeing this. How do you feel about scripts and the way they automate gameplay and et cetera, et cetera?
There are certainly things that I don't want being automated when it's like, classically, like the Shorebots thing was like, I don't want something creating additional database traffic 1,000 times a second for some dumb thing that I don't care about so that somebody can win a PvP fight. There is a tremendous incentive in more traditional MMOs for them to really crack down on botting in a way that I don't feel like we've ever really needed to do, because it's not like in World of Warcraft, if there are bots running around collecting all of the herbs off the ground and a normal person like me can't collect the herbs because of that, then I'm going to be mad at those bots and think, oh, they should do something about this because they're just. But that doesn't really happen in KOL. Like, automating an Ascension doesn't hurt anybody else. And we tend to want to philosophically err on the side of two different things in the sense of the game. Like, we want to err on the side of things being like tradable and accessible in ways that make a player economy interesting, but we also want to err on the side of like KOL being like a website from the days when the internet was still good and stuff just worked and there wasn't any reason not to have an open API and you can scrape stuff if you want. Like, as long as you're not causing problems or like doing something that costs us a bunch of extra money and hosting costs, it has always felt like, why not? Like, if there's something you can do by like requesting a URL that isn't published, like, sure, we should make it so that works. Like, we shouldn't, like, we've never really wanted to crack down on automation at all, really, and especially the kind of automation that, like, I think that Mafia plays a really critical role in, even from a strictly like craven business perspective. Like, Mafia will keep people playing the game during lulls in their enthusiasm for going through the motions of playing the game. It's like a customer retention tool. So it also seems silly to be grouchy about it.
I think there are a whole host of people who for whom playing the game now is like, every time a new item of the month comes out, they look at, right, how can I incorporate this into my big library of scripts? And that sort of challenge is a sort of Zachtronics-esque kind of layer on top of Mafia, in a sense that it's programming for fun.
And that's cool. I like that we've built a thing that can support that kind of playful approach. Like, I don't know. It seems like sort of audibly grouchy about so many things over the course of the history of the game, that this is a thing that people have always expected us to have some fraught relationship with, but we really never have, I don't think.
In my experience, you guys have always been remarkably lenient and, good-natured about these kinds of scripting things. Even when I was in my phase where I wasn't really a dev and I was doing absurd things like scripting millions of hits to the servers because it turns out that you could twiddle your thumbs and do 1 damage and that let you kill that stupid whole kingdom monster. You guys just laughed it off and said, "Hey, that's pretty funny," and then fixed it.
All right, because you told us about it. Like that's the thing that, like, if somebody finds a bug, we sort of want them to like have fun with it for a while and then tell us about it. But that's like the optimum thing, right? It's like, because everybody gets to have a little bit of fun, especially if it's a funny story. I mean, this like running the community like the sort of relationship that I had with my dad about getting in trouble, where it was like, all right, as long as dad thinks this was funny, I won't really be in trouble. The main thing is just tell us, like, it's the like part of the deal with this just being like a website, like every problem that a website has, this world/game is gonna have. And like there's no, like, don't try to, I don't know, there's just no sense in not like trying to enjoy the process of fixing it.
So for the last 20 minutes or so, and I'm not going to use the word bombard, we're gonna gracefully place some questions in front of you, Zack, and hopefully you've got some answers for us. A lot of people, and when I say a lot of people, I mean a lot of people, have said new content item of the month ?
The current sort of dry spell of content items is 100% related to the content items are almost always me doing a huge amount of work. Like nobody, it's not, I don't exactly know. Like Chris, for a while last year, Chris was like, I'm just going to make a realm. I'm just going to design and make a realm one of these months, because this doesn't have to be a thing that takes up a bunch of Zack's time. I can just do it. Just make a realm. And then it just sort of doesn't happen. And I don't know if it's like a confidence thing or just a, like, they always end up being a bunch of work specifically for me. And the last 2 years have been a little bit of a struggle internally for me, figuring out like, God, I know that I have a responsibility to spend time on KOL and maintain this for this dedicated group of players, but I just have to finish the new game. Like I have to finish it. Like there's more people internally counting on me to be working on the new game, and like that's going to be the thing that like provides the runway for us to be able to keep working on KOL for the next 5 or 10 years. I have to do this. And so like the fact that the new game is going on so long is probably the single factor that's making it so there hasn't been a realm lately. Yeah, they're just a lot of work. And we don't think like, oh, we shouldn't do a lot of work because it's not going to make a bunch of money. Like we really don't. It's more like, yeah, we owe it to the community to make an item of the month that has a ton of content in it. And we start to feel like we're letting people down if we haven't made one in a while. And we're definitely there now. Like we should do one. It's just like, I don't know. It always feels like the new game is going to be finished. Okay, 3 months from now, when I'm done with the new game, I'll make a content item of the month. And then I say that every month for 2 years, which just game development.txt. But I don't remember what the specific like theming was for the realm that Chris was going to make.
Was it trains?
Oh yeah, it was Train Realm. Yeah, we know that it's been a while, and that we ought to deliver one of those. And
next question: what's the most surprising way that players took advantage of the "quote unquote" stupid complicated game-ness of KOL in the past year?
In the past year, well, there was that stupid meat exploit. I think that was. I don't want to say what the root cause of that was, because there are probably other cracks that an infinite amount of meat can fall through using some of the same mechanics. But boy, I don't know. I'd have to sit and think. But the Raffle House is doing great. We have sunk more meat than that exploit created. We crossed that threshold, which we were not expecting to do. So now that's sort of ending up being a net positive for the economy.
Are there plans to keep the Raffle House as a means to keep reintroducing old item of the months even after the current pool has run out? Because people are actually quite appreciative of this, also because it puts some downward pressure on the economy of the items that have reached mall max.
I don't know what to call the philosophy that there are some things that like I think should just be sort of off limits in our manipulation of the economy, because it is a real economy, right? Like, we didn't just like, these items came from somewhere. It feels categorically different than us just saying like, all right, I had pitched like, what if we just raffled off a Mr. Accessory every day? And we sort of internally talked ourselves out of it, because it's like, nah, it's cool that every Mr. Accessory that has been generated, I mean, since 2003 or what, since the last PyMonkey arbitrary item creation bug in the very early days of the game, that every Mr. Accessory represents somebody having given us money, and that every item of the month represents somebody having spent a Mr. Accessory on it, right? And we haven't ever just created them. And I don't know, I don't know whether like the fun that would be created by reintroducing old stuff and letting people have a chance. The thing that I want to do, that I got talked out of many, many years ago by the sort of economy contingent of the then dev team, was an ultra rare that lets you turn a familiar in your terrarium back into its larval form.
Do it.
I think that's a good idea.
It's so good. Do it.
I don't think it would have that much of an effect on the actual availability of old item of the month familiars, but what it would do is suddenly make the dream of getting them seem much more attainable. But what that doesn't do is reintroduce
All the other item modes that aren't familiar.
It doesn't introduce old like bind on equip things and stuff like that. And I don't know. We got to do something with the raffle house after this runs out. Like, everybody's going to be so bummed out if it just goes back to the same like tired old prizes that were in there. I think we have a little less than a year left.
So at least we need some new prizes.
Yeah. We absolutely we need to have it come back. Like, if it goes back to having a standard rotation of prizes, they need to be new. That's a problem for future Zack, so I will promise on his behalf to do that.
One question that's looking kind of interesting to me is that we have this habit, or I guess I say we, Asym has this habit of, during challenge paths, introducing mechanical changes or new quest routes or new restrictions. In Vampire, you could enthrall an enemy and have it give you buffs. In Ed, you could re-enter into combats that you'd lost. Boris added the Mountain Man, which we have perennially brought back via Items of the Month. In Jarlsberg, you could only eat what you crafted. In Exploding the War was different and based on food. Is there stuff from that wheelhouse that you have been interested in bringing back into the base game? To what extent do you view the challenge paths as a exploratory space versus a testing things that you might want to introduce into the base game space?
They have all of those values. I mean, sometimes it's like, wow, what if, I remember being a little liberated by like, you know what? In this challenge path, you just can't do the friggin' pirates, and we'll see. We'll like see what it's like. Sometimes it honestly is a matter of like driving like, look, if you just played this, you would not be complaining about it as much. So here's a challenge path where you have to. I don't remember what the war thing was in Exploding.
You could give them large amounts of food, and it would knock off X amount of the side you were fighting.
I think every 7 adventures in the 6 or 7 adventures, I think in the battlefield, the exploded battlefield, you get a non-combat where you could throw booze or food depending on who you were fighting.
It was just a new zone with those monsters in it that advanced the thing. Okay, that's cool.
Because Exploding got rid of all the side zones, so we had to do something new.
I like the idea of that kind of thing. I mean, I remember like Dreadsylvania felt like this is the having to give the coachman food and booze felt like a interesting, at least like trying to come up with ways of like getting rid of these vast supplies of things that nobody really cares about is always sort of fun. Like making it so something that did not have any value previously now has some value is always cool.
Like cold resist potions.
Yeah, exactly. And that's it's always fun to do something where it's suddenly like these things that maybe you didn't care about suddenly matter, and it's like, oh crap, to the wiki, figure out what is in the mall cheap right now that I can buy and either use to my advantage or corner the market on to make a bunch of meat. Like that is my favorite thing about holiday events is just doing sort of like random things like that suddenly make old things. Designing skills for the first couple of avatar paths helped me with the skill revamp that happened, and that maybe there had only been 1 or 2 prior to that, but like getting a little bit of a playground to like see how things work if they're fundamentally different than the way that like things have always been in KOL is definitely valuable from a like learning what things work and what things don't in a less high stakes environment. I don't know that there's anything that I have been like, this was in this challenge path, this was so great, and we're gonna definitely do it. I think there are certainly things that where like KOL high school was a thing where it's like there was all this content, but then by like requiring people to engage with it, it made it feel like a tax rather than an opportunity to do something. And so that has had an influence on future challenge paths.
It is funny that even though you learn all of these cool things in school, most high schoolers do not actually enjoy being forced to go to school.
Yeah, so that's a bummer. Similarly, most people don't enjoy being forced to go to a bunch of different rooms in an invading bugbear spaceship.
Not everyone though. I love that path.
That one was different. Cool. I mean, I think that probably also like without being able to explicitly spell out what lessons we learned from doing stuff, like things like revamping the Naughty Sorceress Tower when I finally got around to that, which what 8 years ago or whatever. Certainly, some lessons from challenge paths worked their way into that in ways that I might have been able to articulate at the time, but can't remember now. KOL is practice for making content for KOL, and I think that's everything we do is going to have some knock-on effects. Like we're going to like, people hated this, so let's not do something like that, or let's figure out why and try a different approach to it and see if that's as much of a bummer.
I got a question here from quite a few folks. Karma system, I think, is about a decade old now. You see a lot of people who've like permed everything. They have a huge surplus of karma. Is there any chance that that could just be do some dumb thing, like, I don't know, perhaps a profile cosmetic, perhaps a counter that says wasted karma, and you have a +1 for every 1,000 that you just throw into the abyss?
The wasted karma thing is funny, but if we did that, that is committing to never doing anything useful with karma again. So I'm reluctant to do that, right? Because then it will have really been wasted. That is a concern that it's correct. Like there should be something to do with it. We always get a little bit hung up on like, well, should like there are people with 10, like I don't remember the magnitudes, but let's say there are people with 10,000 karma and they want to spend it on something. Is a familiar that costs 1,000 karma something that we want to put in front of somebody the first time they ascend? Probably not. Is there another building that shows up after your 20th ascension that has some extra stuff for sale in it? Maybe.
That's a cool idea.
Maybe it's just is out in the world and you can spend karma from there. I like the idea of just some vanity stuff that costs karma. We'd have to be very careful to make it not useful in a competitive sense, I think.
Sure.
We don't want to even further cement what I assume is at least a marginal amount of like rich get richer.
It is always very funny to me when people talk about karma, because I recognize that every player other than me has like 20,000 unspent karma, but most of my ascensions have been casual runs, and I don't have every skill permed, despite being a serious competitive player, and it's hilarious.
Yeah, I actually don't either, because I don't loop.
Which skills don't you have permed? Like, which skills are so meaningless that you don't bother with them?
I always look at Ains one for this because I have everything permed because I like the green boxes on the website.
The interesting thing is the ones that I don't have even softcore permed. I don't have headbutt or knee butt from the Turtle Tamer permed. I don't have disco eye poke from the Disco Minute permed. I never permed, and this is a very 2012-2013 Cannon Fire stance. There's a Disco Bandit skill called Deft Hands that increases the amount of damage your combat items do by 25%. And that made spading hard. And so I have never permed it, despite the fact that I am not really spading things anymore.
I think for a long time, Werther Holbein didn't have ambidextrous functioning permed because he didn't like having to click more in the combat screen.
In my case, most of the missing skills would be all those sorts of random combat skills that, are just worse than other random combat skills.
And this is how you know I'm a better player than them, because I have them all permed.
What if they turn out to be good later for some other thing? Realistically, there shouldn't be combat skills that are strictly worse than other combat skills. It's just hard,
theoretically, that's true. And, I permed, for example, Trust Smack instead of Lunch Smack because it was slightly more expensive, but not that much more, and dealt more damage. But then I did, for G-Lover, have to perm one of the other ones because Trust Smack doesn't have a G. Which was kind of funny.
What was it about custom avatar forms that made them so time consuming to work with?
It was a bunch of the stuff that Kevin had to do dealing with animations submitted by players, right? It wasn't about creating the novel ones. It was about the amount of time that got burned editing other people's work, and that I sort of pulled those out from under him because I was grouchy about the amount of time that he was spending on them. And yeah, it was just a bummer. Like I wish that we had figured out a way early on to, all right, for like $5 instead of how much a custom avatar form cost, here is a thing where you can just click on a head and a hat and two items from your inventory and make an avatar, and then that's what that is, as opposed to a thing that just we were always always behind on. And it was always like people were like, I gave you this money, why is this thing 4 months late? And it's like, well, because this whole thing sucks and is terrible to deal with. And it's like, yeah, it was, I had wanted to stop selling them for a long, long time, and I think it finally got to the point where it was just creating so much stress for everybody that Kevin didn't make me put them back when I pulled them out.
Well, there's one question here that has been asked quite a bit. I'll just ask it, and it's name changes, as in a Mr. Store item or maybe an ultra rare that lets you change your name to some degree.
This is a thing that used to come up on the radio show all the time, and it was always like, yeah, okay, for Mr. A, you can change your name, and then we just don't do it.
I cannot possibly imagine why someone might want to remove a number from the end of their name. No, I cannot.
It was always asked by a guy whose player name was Splash Fart, and we were always like, why? Like, yes, we'll add name changes, but you're not allowed to change yours because it is the perfect player
No,
name.
he needs to change his so I can change mine to Splashfart.
It has been brought up in dev a few times as well, but it's also tricky because you need a way to like track the previous names of people, and some people might want to swap names between accounts. And how do you handle that?
If two people wanted to swap names without getting sniped, if it was a Mr. A to do a name change, none of those like simultaneity issues would come up, I don't think, right? Because if there's a cost associated with it, it becomes a lot less likely that it's going to get trolled. And I think we more or less figured out, like, there's a bunch of stuff where the KOL database is like extremely unnormalized from old like performance reasons. And so there's a bunch of stuff that would still have your old name on it, which has always been a thing that's a little bit weird. So, but yeah, it's I don't know. One of these days, I'll just say like, Chris, let's actually make this happen, and then he will. We'll figure it out, right? It's not like if the mods can see your name history, then we're not going to run into like.
Scott suggests putting name fungible tokens in the Mr. Store. I like that.
Yeah, and somebody we got an email from somebody who was like, hey, we think that your art would be perfect for NFTs. Are you interested in working with your company? And I replied to the guy, and Kevin said, man, you were way nicer to that guy than I would have been.
Yeah, I'm surprised you were nice. That I was ready to hear your response and it be good.
Well, I said, thanks for the interest, but like we're pretty fundamentally opposed to the whole idea of that technology. And even if we weren't, our user base would rake us over the coals if we ever did anything like this. So thanks anyway. And the guy was just like, yeah, cool, understood. Bye. I mean, he's just some finance guy. Like, it's not, yeah.
What you do is you make your own NFTs by putting untradeable mall items in your stores in Jigstore, so that they can only be bought once. And there you go, NFTs in KOL, and everyone will be mad about that instead.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. Like, we digital items with scarcity. Wow, what a crazy technology that we definitely haven't been making money off of since 2003. Like, yeah, it's, man.
Just to finish off, and this is another last question that a lot of people have been asking. People really miss the Asymmetric podcast. Do you think that might come back perhaps once Next of Loathing is kind of wrapped up, or possibly before? Like, what do you think? Is there a future for Asymmetric podcast, do you think?
We could talk about it. I mean, there's something that I have liked about the COVID era is that a lot of podcasts that used to not, like, podcasts would just disappear if a host vanished because people didn't want to record remotely because of the compromises and technical difficulties of it. And a lot of people have just gotten over that in the age of every human interaction taking place over Zoom. So yeah, it's not entirely out of the question. It's, it has been a bummer not being able to spend very much time with Kevin, and we've finally, although we're back to only hanging out outside now until the fact that my daughter is too young to get vaccinated has basically meant that there has not been much of an improvement in things since 2020 in terms of plague safety. And so, but yeah, I like talking about video games. Not out of the question for sure.
We like talking about video games with you, Zack, so thank you so much for coming on. Hopefully it won't be 3 years before the next time we have you on.
Absolutely not.
Certainly not based on this question list that we didn't get to.
We still have a lot of questions, yes.
Thanks to you, Sam. Thanks to Dictator. Thanks to Canon. Lyft, obviously, very big thanks to you. And thanks to everybody listening. We had, at one point, 80 plus people on Twitch, however many people are in the channel now. So there's definitely interest in listening to you, what you have to say about the game, Zack. So hopefully be back in the future. And thank you to everybody.